I would like us to look a little deeper into the whole area of assessments a bit more, since we're talking about competency-based assessment framework. In our previous lesson, we discussed assessment and said that if you could only take one thing from that video, it was that assessment is a process of gathering information and documenting that information about the student learning. And very important to understand about assessment is that there are very many different types of assessments. And you may have heard of some of them, and maybe some of them are new to you. For example, I know all of you have heard of formative assessments. You've heard of summative assessments. Have you heard of diagnostic assessments? These conformative assessments, there's norm referenced assessments, we'll discuss that a bit more. There's criterion referenced assessment, we'll discuss that also a bit more. There's even ipsative assessments, which to tell you the truth was also a bit new to me. Ipsative assessments is basically when you assess somebody based on their previous performance. I'm guessing maybe the way somebody like Kipchoge, he runs, this time he does 2 hours, 1 second. This time when he runs, he does 2 hours, 2 seconds. You look back, it's an ipsative assessment. So maybe that's an example I can give. Maybe it's more detailed than that. I encourage you to read a bit more. I want us to focus on just a few of them, which are super relevant to us when discussing the competency-based assessment framework. And the first one maybe is diagnostic assessments. Diagnostic assessments is exactly that, to diagnose. You assess in order to diagnose where the challenge could be. Straightforward. But I want us to maybe look at norm-referenced assessments. Norm, N-O-R-M, normal. Norm-referenced assessments are basically assessments against others. So you're comparing a student and how a student has performed against how others have performed. We're referencing to a normal. We're referencing to how the bigger population has performed. So norm-referenced assessments really is about comparing the people directly to one another in terms of how they've performed this time. Okay. Now, and to contrast norm-referenced assessments with criterion-referenced assessments. Criteria is the plural of criterion, where comparing them doesn't really matter. Comparing the individuals against one another doesn't really matter. What matters is comparing the individual to the criteria that has been set. Okay? That's what a criterion referenced assessment means. I feel that it's super important to understand this too, because in Kenya we are used to norm referenced assessment and to some degree criterion referenced assessments. These are things that are familiar to us, and by knowing a bit more about them and by really emphasizing them a bit more, you really see their significance in your work as a teacher. Now, the other two types of assessments that I really want to focus on are formative assessments and summative assessments. A formative assessment, we can derive it from the word formative, formation. Okay? It's basically assessment for learning. Okay? The reason I'm assessing you is so that I help you to learn better or to learn more. So I'm assessing you and I'm asking you to make some corrections based on that assessment. Okay, so it's assessment for the purpose of enhancing learning. Okay, and I think it's the type of assessment that's really promoted the most under the new competency-based assessment framework, and we'll discuss a bit more about how come formative assessment as a type of assessment is being promoted more than any other type of assessment. Now, summative assessment, on the other hand, once again, we can derive it from the word sum, the total, is an assessment that you do at the end of a certain learning period. And you see that, how well are you able to apply the skills and knowledge that you've gained this term or this midterm? How well are you able to apply the knowledge and skills? That becomes a summative assessment. It's a sum of a certain period. We just want to know, how are you able to apply this knowledge and skills? So you see, to contrast it from formative assessment, for formative assessment, I'm really using this to give you feedback immediately to guide your learning process. While for summative assessment, I'm using it to sort of determine, how far are you? Where are you? How are you doing across the learning period? How are you doing? So all these different types of assessments are there, and the really confusing thing is that one type of assessment can be another type of assessment at the same time. This is what I mean. If I say, for example, let's say you've cooked some food, okay, and I taste your food, and I tell you, I think you need to add a bit more salt. It's saltless, okay, and you add more salt, then at the end of the day, you have a very good dish. What kind of an assessment is that? It can be a formative assessment in the sense that I've tested your food and I've given you feedback, and you use that feedback to improve your dish. And later on, by the time you're serving it, you're serving a dish that has the right amount of salt, okay? It can also be a summative assessment where I say, you know what, after 2 hours of cooking, no salt, this is what you do every day, you know? This becomes me judging you that, you know what, you are a person that at the end of the cooking period, you still haven't managed to put salt. You know, that can become summative also. So you see, the same kind of activity can take different forms. It depends on what the intention is. You know, that's really the most important thing to understand about assessments. It depends on what the intention is. And I'm saying this because all too often I hear people saying a CAT, a continuous assessment test, okay, in a school is a formative assessment, while an end of term exam is a summative assessment. My reaction to that is maybe it's true. Maybe that is how you're using it, maybe. But that is not the definition of a formative assessment, neither is it the difference between a formative assessment and a summative assessment, okay? The thing that makes an assessment summative or formative, first and foremost, is the intentions. What are we using it for? If the reason I'm testing your food is so that I decide that, you know what, you're a person that never puts salt, my intention is summative in nature. If I'm testing your food in order to tell you, before you serve it, make sure that you add a bit more salt so that the people enjoy the food. That becomes a formative assessment. So really, I want us to have that understanding as teachers, and I want us to have the flexibility in our minds, okay, to accept that these assessments can take different forms depending on the intention followed by the design, okay? So, and to end this by saying that if you could once again take one thing from this video is that number one, there are different types of assessments that exist, and that these assessments can really be fluid in nature, okay? One thing you do can be summative today, it can be formative tomorrow, it can be ipsative the other, it can be norm referenced, it can be criterion referenced. Totally depends on your intentions and how you apply the assessment, okay? So the thing I'd urge the most is know what these types of assessments are, but have an open mind as to how exactly they're used. It's just one of those things in life where it really, really, really depends.